Mia stood in front of the mirror, staring at the diamond ring on her finger. It was beautiful, expensive, everything a woman could ask for. Yet, it felt like a shackle. She had married Lucas not out of love, but out of convenience, swayed by her parents' assurances that love wasn't necessary for a successful marriage. Stability, security, and a man who adores you, that's what matters, they had told her, and Lucas was exactly that, devoted, patient, endlessly giving. But Mia couldn't ignore the growing emptiness inside her. Every dinner date, every thoughtful gift, every gentle touch from Lucas only made her feel more trapped. He wasn't cruel, he wasn't neglectful, if anything. He was too good to her. But he wasn't exciting. He wasn't the kind of man who made her heart race. Instead of gratitude, she resented him. She forced a smile as Lucas kissed her forehead before heading to work. The moment the door shut behind him, her face fell. She had everything: comfort, wealth, a husband who worshipped her. And yet, she wanted more. Or maybe, she wanted something else entirely. She just didn't know what, at least. Not yet, but soon, she would. The first time Mia met Owen, it felt like stepping into a world she had long forgotten existed. He was the kind of man who commanded attention without even trying, effortlessly charming. Confident in a way that made her pulse quicken. His presence was intoxicating, so different from Lucas's quiet, predictable devotion. Where Lucas planned romantic dinners in candlelit restaurants, Owen pulled her into dimly lit bars with live music. Where laughter and the scent of whiskey filled the air. Where Lucas spoke in careful, measured words, Owen teased, flirted, and made her feel like the most desirable woman in the room. At first, it was innocent, a few stolen conversations, a lingering glance too long. But the more time she spent with Owen, the more restless she became. He awakened something in her, a hunger for excitement, for recklessness, for love that felt like fire rather than obligation. And when he kissed her for the first time, she didn't hesitate. She knew it was wrong. Lucas was good to her, too good. But she couldn't bring herself to care. Not when Owen looked at her like she was a prize worth winning. Not when she finally felt alive. The guilt came later, in fleeting moments. But every time she returned to Lucas's carefully structured world, she felt suffocated, so she ran back to Owen. To his laughter, his unpredictability, his arms. And every time, it became easier to forget the life she was betraying. Lucas wasn't blind. He noticed the change in Mia long before she thought he did. The way she avoided his touch. The way she looked past him instead of at him. The way she smiled at her phone, not realizing how obvious she was. He had seen it before, the slow unraveling of love, or in this case, the slow unraveling of a lie. Mia had never truly loved him, but he had convinced himself that maybe, over time, she would, that maybe, if he gave her enough, did enough, she would finally see him as more than just a provider. But love wasn't something you could earn, and Mia had already decided she didn't want him. So Lucas stopped trying. He didn't argue when she canceled date nights. He didn't ask where she had been when she came home late, smelling like a man who wasn't him. He didn't react when she started dressing up for errands, or when her phone became another limb she refused to let go of. Instead, he stayed quiet, gathering pieces of the truth, messages, call logs, bank statements. He let her believe she was getting away with it. But he was waiting. Not for her confession. He knew she would never give him that. He was waiting for the moment she would feel untouchable. The moment she would think she had won. Because when that moment came, he would be the one walking away, and she would never see it coming. Mia thought she was in control. She had spent weeks rehearsing how she would tell Lucas she wanted a divorce. Imagining his reaction, the hurt, the disbelief, the desperate pleas for her to stay. She pictured him begging, offering to change, trying to win her back. But when the moment finally arrived, reality shattered every expectation. She stood in the living room, arms crossed, chin lifted, preparing for a fight. "Lucas, I don't love you. I want a divorce," she said, her voice steady. She braced herself for anger, heartbreak, anything. But Lucas simply looked at her, then let out a quiet, almost amused chuckle. "All right," he said, setting his coffee cup down. Mia's stomach dropped. This wasn't how it was supposed to go. That's it? She pressed, searching his face for emotion. He smirked. What else is there to say? And then he picked up his phone and continued scrolling, as if her words meant nothing. The next morning, confusion turned to panic when a man in a suit knocked on the door. Handing her divorce papers, Lucas had filed first. Her name was already on the documents, waiting for her signature. And when she checked her accounts, she felt the ground beneath her shift. Every joint bank account? Emptied. Every shared credit card? Cancelled. The financial safety net she had counted on was gone. Mia had played the game, but Lucas had beaten her before she even realized she was losing. Mia had never felt truly alone before, not like this. She had spent her entire life with a safety net, whether it was Lucas's unwavering devotion or her parents' unshakable support. But when she arrived at their doorstep, expecting comfort, she was met with something far colder. Her mother's face twisted in shock as she opened the door. "What are you doing here?" The question wasn't laced with concern, it was filled with judgment. Mia hesitated before stepping inside, her suitcase dragging behind her. "Lucas and I are getting a divorce," she admitted, her voice weaker than she wanted it to be. Silence stretched between them. Her father sat in his chair, arms crossed, expression unreadable. Her mother exhaled sharply, rubbing her temples. "You threw away a good man," her father finally said, his tone laced with disappointment. "For what? Some fantasy?" Mia's jaw tightened. "You don't understand." "Oh, we understand perfectly," her mother snapped. "We raised you better than this." Mia swallowed hard. She expected anger from Lucas, but not from them. "I thought you'd be on my side." Her father scoffed. "Your side? You embarrassed this family. Do you think people won't talk? Do you think we can afford that kind of shame?" And that's when Mia realized she had nowhere to turn. Lucas had let her go without a fight. And now, the people she thought would always stand by her were shutting the door. 2. Mia felt a surge of relief as she stood outside Owen's apartment. He would understand. He would hold her, tell her she had done the right thing. After all, this was what they had talked about for months, leaving Lucas. Being together, finally living the life they had dreamed of. She knocked, excitement and nerves twisting inside her. When the door opened, Owen stood there, shirtless, his usual smirk in place, but something was different. There was no warmth, no eagerness, just hesitation. "Hey," she breathed, stepping forward, but he didn't move aside. "Mia," he said, rubbing the back of his neck. "What are you doing here?" She blinked. "I left him," she said, forcing a smile. "It's finally over. We can be together now." Owen's smirk faltered, and in that moment, Mia felt something inside her crack. "Yeah, he glanced over his shoulder. And for the first time, she noticed a woman's voice in the background. Laughter. Her stomach turned to ice. "Who is that?" He sighed. "Mia, listen, things changed." Her breath hitched. "Changed?" He stepped back slightly, creating space between them. "I didn't think you'd actually leave him," he admitted, "and, well, I moved on." The weight of those words crushed her. Mia had given up everything, her marriage, her security, her dignity, for a man who had never planned to catch her when she fell. And now, she had nothing. Mia sat in her car outside Lucas's house, gripping the steering wheel so tightly her knuckles turned white. The last few days had been a blur of regret, shame, and loneliness. Owen had thrown her away like she meant nothing. Her parents had turned their backs on her. But Lucas had loved her once. Maybe, just maybe, she could fix this. She took a deep breath and stepped out, smoothing her dress as she walked up the familiar path to the front door. The house looked different. New flowers lined the porch. The front windows open, filling the space with warmth. She knocked, heart pounding. The door swung open, but it wasn't Lucas who greeted her. It was a woman, stunning, effortlessly elegant, and visibly pregnant. Mia's stomach dropped. "Can I help you?" the woman asked politely. placing a protective hand over her belly. Mia barely found her voice. I'm looking for Lucas. Before the woman could respond, Lucas appeared behind her, his arm casually wrapping around her waist. When he saw Mia, his expression didn't change. No anger, no sadness, just nothing. Mia swallowed hard. Lucas, I wanted to talk. His gaze was cool, distant. There's nothing left to say. Mia. Her lips parted, but before she could speak, Lucas gave her one last glance, empty, indifferent, then gently shut the door in her face. She stood there, stunned. He was gone, and he was never coming back. Mia stood frozen on Lucas's doorstep, the weight of his final words pressing down on her like a boulder. The door had closed softly, no anger, no dramatic slamming, just quiet finality, and somehow, that was worse. She had expected something, anything, maybe resentment in his eyes, maybe a flicker of longing, but there had been nothing. No recognition of the years they had spent together, no hesitation, no second thoughts. He had looked at her the same way one might glance at a stranger, polite, indifferent, detached. Mia's throat tightened as she turned away, walking slowly down the path. With every step, reality sank in deeper. Lucas hadn't just moved on, he had erased her. She was nothing but a memory he no longer cared to revisit. And the woman inside? Holly, beautiful, glowing, carrying his child, living the life Mia had foolishly thrown away. Her hands trembled as she reached her car, gripping the door handle for support. She had come here hoping for forgiveness, maybe even a second chance. Instead, she had been met with the cruelest punishment of all, irrelevance. Tears blurred her vision, but she forced herself to swallow them down. Lucas had won, not with vengeance, not with anger, but by doing the one thing she never thought possible. He had forgotten her, and that, more than anything, made her feel truly, utterly alone. Mia sat alone in her childhood bedroom, staring at the faded wallpaper that once felt familiar, now suffocating. The house was quiet, but not in a peaceful way. It was the kind of silence that came with shame, with disappointment thick in the air. Her parents barely spoke to her. When they did, their words were clipped, laced with resentment for the daughter who had dragged their name through the mud. She picked up her phone for the 100th time that day, scrolling through Lucas's social media. There he was, smiling, arms wrapped around Holly, their newborn baby nestled between them. He looked happy, not just content, but free. Her chest tightened. He had really let her go. Mia had once believed she held all the power, that she could walk away and leave Lucas broken. But in the end, she was the one left behind. No husband, no lover, no home, no money, just a past she couldn't undo. Regret was a heavy thing. It didn't scream or demand attention. It whispered in the quiet moments, in the nights spent alone, in the realization that the person she had taken for granted had never needed her at all. Life has a way of teaching lessons the hard way. Mia's story is a reminder that love, loyalty, and integrity should never be taken for granted. In today's world, many chase temporary excitement, mistaking it for happiness, only to realize too late that stability and genuine care are rare gifts. If you have someone who truly loves and values you, don't let boredom or fleeting temptation ruin something real. Grass isn't always greener, it's just different. Appreciate what you have before it becomes a memory. Because not everyone will wait for you to realize their worth. Sometimes, they just move on.